Hi, I am Umar Sheikh and welcome back to the YouTube channel of Australia Immigration Matters. In today's video, we are going to discuss in detail about the new skills in demand visa which is going to be established and announced by Department of Home Affairs in the next financial year. The Australian government is planning to replace the existing temporary skills shortage subclass 482 visa with a new skills in demand visa which will have more and flexible PR pathways. This visa is primarily focused towards the workers currently working in Australia and the workers who are planning to migrate to Australia on an employer sponsorship. So let's get started to understand the basic concepts and eligibility criteria of this new skills in demand visa. So the Australian government is planning to create three targeted pathways within the skills in demand visa, adopting the risk-based approach to regulation as recommended in the new migration strategy. The three targeted pathways include specialist skills pathway, core skills pathway, and essential skills pathway. We will study each of the pathways one by one in detail. So the first pathway to be established is the specialist skills pathway, which will recognize highly skilled migrants who are beneficial to Australia's national productivity, including through their support of critical sovereign capabilities and potential to grow the skills and expertise of the Australian workforce. This pathway will be a new streamlined approach for highly skilled specialists to ensure Australia can quickly and easily recruit top talent in areas of need. For example, it will help Australia attract highly skilled engineering managers who develop electrolyzers to help with their transition to a new net zero economy, or cyber specialists who assist banks to respond to cyber attacks, and software engineers who help Australia embrace the artificial intelligence transformation. The specialist skills pathway will be available to applicants who meet the general eligibility criteria, for example, be nominated by an approved employer, meet the health and character requirements, and who are in an occupation except trade workers, machinery operators and drivers, and laborers, and earning at least $135,000 and no less than existing Australian workers in the same occupation. Now, this earning of $135,000 will be called specialist skills threshold in future. This specialist skills threshold of $135,000 closely corresponds with the 90th percentile earnings of all the workers across Australia. And for the applicants of this pathway, the department is also committing to a service standard of 7 days visa processing time on average. The specialist skills pathway will remain a modest part of the temporary skilled program over time. The government is committed to protect the integrity of this pathway to ensure that the skills involved are genuinely specialized and in high demand. To do so, the specialist skills pathway will be indexed annually through legislation to maintain the intent of the pathway over time. Jobs and Skills Australia will have dedicated resourcing to monitor labor market impacts of this pathway to ensure it supports innovation, job creation, and upskilling of labor workers. The Department of Home Affairs will establish a monitoring mechanism to ensure that employees are not paid less than their nominated salary, and the salary threshold will be calculated to ensure employers cannot artificially inflate a salary or rely on excessive overtime to meet this threshold. Now let's talk about the second pathway, which is called core skills pathway. The second pathway in the new skills in demand visa is the core skills pathway. Most temporary skilled migrants will come through the core skills pathway, which is designed to bring in the skilled employees Australia needs now and in the future to ensure that we are able to provide ourselves with the goods and services we need to support our way of life. For example, it might include a registered nurse who is helping a regional hospital's emergency department dealing with acute workforce shortages, or a secondary school teacher helping teach science in the public schools in Australia. The core skills pathway will be available to applicants who meet the general eligibility criteria, as I mentioned in the earlier specialist skills pathway part, and whose occupation is on a new core skills occupation list, which relates to occupations identified by Jobs and Skills Australia as being in shortage or where Australia has committed to providing access to the labor market, and who will be paid a salary at or above the TSMIT level of $70,000, which shall be retitled the core skills threshold when the new system is implemented, or the relevant average market salary when it is above the TSMIT level. So we can say that for the core skills pathway, the range of the salary, eligible salary will be from $70,000 until $135,000 on annual basis. Unlike the specialist skills pathway, trade workers, machinery operators and drivers and laborers will be eligible under the core skills pathway subject to being identified on the core skills occupation list, based on evidence and advice from Jobs and Skills Australia, and being paid above the TSMIT level for sure to be eligible for core skills pathway. Now let's talk about the third pathway, which is essential skills pathway. Now, let's first understand the need of this pathway for its context. Currently, when an employer wants to gain access to a temporary skilled migrant outside of the standard visa rules, including for migration below the TSMIT level, they do so using labor agreements. There are currently more than 1,800 unique labor agreements in effect. Visa grants under labor agreements make up approximately 5% of the temporary skilled migration system, yet many of these agreements do not contain the protection that would be expected in lower paid sectors and occupations who are most at risk of exploitation and displacing Australian workers with similar skills. So according to Department of Home Affairs, this is one of the signs that the migration system is not working as intended. Now, to bridge this gap, the government will evaluate how to develop an essential skills pathway, which will be a more regulated pathway for lower paid workers with essential skills. In conclusion, in consultation with states, unions, and businesses and migrant workers. In defining essential skills, the government may give consideration to sectors and occupations that are vital to supporting the living standards of Australians and where persistent shortages exist. Improvements in wages and conditions in such occupations where they have occurred have not proven sufficient to meet these labor shortages in the short term. Now, the government is primarily considering the pathway in the context of the care and support economy, which has become essential to the quality of life of Australians. This pathway would be distinct from the core skills pathway and the specialist skills pathway. These arrangements would be sector specific, capped, embedded with stronger regulation and minimum standards and subject to further advice from Jobs and Skills Australia and its tripartite mechanisms. With this approach and the principles in mind, acknowledging that there will always be a role in the system for labor agreements, the government will evaluate existing labor agreements for below TSMIT migration and will rewrite guidelines for future labor agreements to provide stronger worker protections. The government will further consider how best to enshrine these guidelines in their legislation. Now, within these sectors, the distinctions between the core skills pathway and essential skills pathway could be defined by occupation and pay. For example, in the care and support economy, aged and disabled carers would have access via the essential skills pathway, but most registered nurses or allied health professionals would have access via the core skills pathway. Both pathways, however, will be regulated to ensure that Australia is receiving the skilled workers it actually needs and the employees are protected from exploitation. So the department will continue consulting on how best to regulate migration for lower paid workers with essential skills till mid-2024 before making any announcement with respect to this new skills in demand visa. The government will index the new core skills and specialist skills thresholds in line with annual movements in weekly average ordinary time earnings. Now, let's talk about the changes expected in labor market testing as a result of this new essential skills pathway. Now, both businesses and unions agree that the current labor market testing requirements are not fit for purpose. The government will immediately move to streamline labor market testing by removing the requirements to advertise positions through Workforce Australia and will subsequently increase the validity period from 4 to 6 months. As Jobs and Skills Australia's role further matures, the government will consider moving away from employer-conducted labor market testing towards mechanisms for robust and genuine independent verification of labor market need. Now, on closing note, I would say that the government will do more to help Australia compete in the global race for talent. This includes committing to clear, fast service standards for visa processing for temporary skilled workers. The government will establish a median service standard of 21 days for the new skills in demand visa and as a special case, 7 days for the specialist skills pathway. The government will also look for opportunities to modernize the accreditation pathway, which will further help approved sponsors gain streamlined access to the migrant workers they need. Additional protections and oversight mechanism can be introduced. For example, a public register of approved sponsors can be introduced, which can help the employees to find the eligible sponsors in case they want to change their employment or job to continue their journey through the work visa towards the PR pathway. With that note, I would like to thank everyone on behalf of Australia Immigration Matters. Keep following us on our social media platforms and stay tuned for more updates.